Okay, welcome everybody. We will call the December 5th Economic Development Committee to order. We have a quorum. All committee members are present. The agenda consists of 3 pieces of legislation that establish TIF districts in 3 areas of Grandview: Goodell mixed use, Southern Gateway, neighborhood business districts. And so we'll go ahead. I think if it's okay with you, Director Cupper, we can discuss these as a whole, and then kind of open up for discussion for the group. And so if you could offer some context.
Yes, happy to, and then I'll also ask Caleb Bell to get into some of the more particulars, and if you've got any complicated questions, you can also answer those. So these 3 TIFs really will cover nearly all of the remaining parcels in our commercial districts. They're segregated by district. Philosophically, TIFs are supposed to be used for things that benefit the area that they are applied to. So there may be instances where we have something that only applies to Goodale or only applies to Grandview Avenue. So we set the TIFs up as 3 distinct areas. If there's an improvement that might impact all of those areas, like the replacement of the sewer leaving the city that is sort of impacting development capacity throughout the city, that could be something that could be paid for by all monies flowing from all 3 of these TIFs. The logic here really is started with a discussion about how the city can capture revenue off of improved parcels when there's not a big development deal like we've seen at Grandview Crossing or Grandview Yard. The TIF legislation will allow us to capture, so the reason we're trying to get it done this year is because that will allow us to capture the increased value for, so happens we have 1 building in each area, the Eddington at the First in Grandview, kind of neighborhood business TIF, the AEP storage building on the Goodale TIF, and then in the Southern Gateway TIF, the Sheets building. So we will be able to capture the increased value for all 3 of those projects in addition to future ones that come online, and feed those into, there'll be 3 new funds set up, 1 for each area, feed that those additional dollars into each of those funds, and then aggregate them across all of the parcels to accomplish whatever improvement we may want to apply those dollars to. These are non-school TIFs. So the school system will get the same they would have gotten, or really, as I like to say, hopefully more, because part of this is a means to an end in terms of supporting these areas to allow them to redevelop, to be able to create funding streams for certain kinds of city improvements that might facilitate smart redevelopment in these 3 areas. And so ultimately, hopefully, we'll support the schools yet further as the areas do redevelop. So they're rolling TIFs. So once the legislation is in place, we don't have to pull TIF value off of all the parcels. We can, but we don't have to. The time to trigger the TIF on a particular parcel is when the value on that parcel increases, because you're only ever capturing the increased value, not the base value, which will continue to be applied and distributed as it always has been. So all of these parcels could develop in a different year, let's say, and we could begin collecting the value only in the year when they are improved. What else? Another high low. I think that's about it, I guess.
It's
Oh, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say it's kind of like a kindergarten book in comparison to the complexity of the Grandview Yard TIF and its associated components and all of the agreements. But I do want to clarify, because honestly, that's the only one I think any of us have, elected officials, have worked with. You mentioned that it's a rolling TIF, and can you elaborate, or can someone elaborate a little bit more on that in terms of functionally how that increased, the incremental revenue is going to be leveraged? Are those on a cash for cash basis? Is it going to be leveraged into bond opportunities for improvements, et cetera? So, because we don't have anything in mind at this point, this is just to begin to capture the revenue.
Yeah, so I'll say what I can say, and then actually maybe Caleb can give some examples of some other
Caleb, it's good to have you on the side of the table.
Yes,
communities.
nice to see you. I had post-traumatic stress from being here last time, so.
So you're right, we don't have very specific things that we're aiming to do instantaneously with the revenue that we get, but we can accumulate it. And there is a very long, of course, in a community that's 100 years old, there's a long list of things that need to be improved. Some possible opportunities over time that might be appropriate. As I mentioned, I alluded to sewers, so there's older sewers that have performance or capacity issues that dovetail with whether or not you can build more stuff, right? They need sewer service to support that, so that might be one opportunity. Another one could be if there is an alley, for instance, that could be helpful in accessing certain parcels, because these parcels are all configured in not a super thoughtful way. They're very old and sometimes don't have good public infrastructure serving all of them. I don't know, Caleb.
Yeah, no, those are all excellent points. And what I would also point you to is the leveraging opportunity with this TIF. It's possible that the three different funds each are accruing, and so the fund balances grow. And then you can start to project on a more regular basis what the annual revenue is. That's a bondable revenue stream. That's a revenue stream that you can supplement other municipal resources with in order to help with paying debt service. You could also do it as a one-off, and let's say do streetscape improvements in an area solely secured with that one TIF.
Draw some of the cash off.
Yeah, just draw some of it off. So there's a lot of policy options, frankly, doing it this way, because the municipality isn't immediately pledging all of this revenue to another counterparty like an investor. Instead, you all continue to hold the cards for investment choices.
And each of these three districts has to operate, for lack of a better word, with its own budget, its own coffer.
Its own fund. The statute sets up separate funds, and that's to, again, follow the policy of the direct benefit that's required under the statutes.
So as
there
the
are
improvement occurs on XYZ parcel,
Yep.
the improvements that are the resulting infrastructure improvements are in direct effect to that
yeah.
improvement.
Correct.
And development.
And you all have a road network that is tight enough that some of these could even cross districts, where you might be making a road improvement or an improvement in a certain part of town that, both two districts benefit from, so you could make that choice. Also, any municipal buildings, anything that's of service to the entire community could be paid for with these funds. And a final note, the General Assembly changed the law since we last talked that allows for TIF to be used for road, sewer, and water maintenance. And maintenance cost is really an operating expense of the municipality, but to the extent that you have road or any sewer maintenance, you could possibly tap these TIF funds for that. So again, there's some more flexibility.
You have some discretion
Yeah.
if we get into a position where those funds would be needed. It would still be limited,
Yes.
isolated to specific
Yep.
assignments, but not strictly dedicated as our previous experience.
Correct, that's right. Yep. And you asked another question, which was about the rolling nature of these TIFs, and I wanted to explain that. So the TIF statute, these are described sometimes as TIF areas. That's actually a misnomer under the law. An area TIF is more like a single-family residential TIF that you might see in a greenfield suburban context, where you have single-family lots coming out. We see some of those around town, Hilliard and Grove City and whatnot. But here, these are commercial parcel TIFs, where commercial value only and parcels on an individualized basis have their own 30-year clock associated with them. So as Liz was saying, when you trigger that exemption, then a 30-year clock runs for that particular parcel. That does not implicate the parcel next door. The parcel next door may have no increase in value, and you may wait 2 or 3 or 5 years until it has increased value, at which time you trigger its clock. So the county auditor tracks all the clocks, and what happens is all that funnels into Fund 1, Fund 2, and Fund 3, based on the different clocks that are running. So it's a little more, it's rolling and it's nuanced, but our county auditor does a fairly good job at keeping all this straight.
Feels like this is a lot more, let's say, traditional.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Yeah, I would say so.
Because we're not measuring anticipated bonds and known projects against it, therefore there's no waterfall, so to speak. There's no
Correct.
repayment agreements or matrices. We're going to gather funds. We have the ability to access those funds for limited purposes, and at such a point that either in conjunction with an agreement with the developer or under the sole discretion of the city, they can take that limited revenue or leveraged revenue, or leveraged funds, I should say, and conduct a project with it.
Absolutely. So a number of municipalities in central Ohio have utilized TIFs over their downtown area in a similar way like this, where, for example, Powell did a downtown TIF where they paid for Wi-Fi for the parks and some streetscape improvements in that area. But they were doing that just to kind of drive the policy of increasing value begets itself. So if we improve our parks in our downtown, we put Wi-Fi in, then there's going to be more value. Columbus did a downtown TIF, but they used it for the TIF revenue for parking to densify downtown and to drive the increases in value on the downtown buildings into parking assets. You would have those choices. You also are hitting upon another choice that arises, which is you could do an individual deal with an individual parcel or an individual deal with a development. And this approach is kind of nice because you are setting up the TIF exemption to just have something in place in the event that the development occurs. And then if it does occur, you activate it. And if we're all comfortable with non-school and there really is no other need and you can do your deal within that confine, then you can do that deal and you could do a separate agreement with that developer. If you decide that, hey, we need more juice in this, and the developer wants to have a conversation with the schools and go and try to get a different result, that's possible. This doesn't preclude that. What you would do is terminate the TIF as to that parcel and then do a different deal if needed. So if there were a bigger or more important or more impactful deal where you needed something else, you can always extract that parcel from this system.
Or benefited the schools in some other way.
Yeah, in a side payments or some type of activity. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Smith?
I like the concept of this and agree with TIF financing and everything, but the one question I had, the residents, voted yes for issue 32 last month, and will there be any consequences or negative impact with respect to, the bond issue for that? Because, like for example, with the TIF in Grandview Yard, that's all TIF'd, and for example, that none of that TIF money will be going to the increase in property taxes there. It's just going to, TIF payments. Yeah, will there be any impact with respect to, this latest bond issue?
So
we
how
just
does
passed?
bond issue 32 interact with this?
Yes, how does it interact? Yeah, because all the money, other than the pilots, will be going to the TIF, right?
All right, so I think in theory, there could be that kind of an impact. However, in this case, we control where we direct money that would come, into this TIF. And one of the eligible expenses is the building.
Oh, okay.
So that can be a decision that is made at a certain moment. Of course, the request was created not with specific anticipation of additional development anyway. The issue 32 didn't anticipate additional value. It's the value as of today. So in that sense, there's not the same kind of an impact that there is from Grandview Yard or Grandview Crossing.
Thank you. Any other discussion from committee members? We'll open it up to the rest of council. Anybody else have questions or comments?
Sort of have a broad question, just a refresher, Mr. Tucker or the mayor. How do we decide when to use when do we decide to use a non-school TIF versus a school TIF? How do we make that decision?
Well, again, I'll speak higher level, if you will. If you look at Grandview Yard and Grandview Crossing, neither one of those areas had any infrastructure essentially. So they had huge lifts from a public investment perspective and needed as much capital as they could, reasonably apply towards those needs. These corridors that we have, while they may be missing some infrastructure, they're not missing that kind of infrastructure or super burdened by, brownfield considerations. So I think just, high level, that is how I thought about it. And I don't know if there's other considerations.
No, I think that's a really fair analysis. I mean, this is much more incremental. Whereas Grandview Yard or Grandview Crossing, yes, required permanent leveraging of those funds, and that required not only your funds that you control through the TIF process, but also some participation of the schools. And that was an arrangement that those parties all had to come together, all three parties had to come together to resolve. The statutes do not require you to do anything but notice the school district when you are not diverting any of their funds. So in this case, you're not diverting any school district funds, in which case all they would receive is a notice of the TIF. The portion of the property tax pie that you're diverting is really county and municipal millage. We talked a little earlier about how you could use the millage from these TIFs to pay for a building, and that's absolutely reasonable. It's one of the eligible uses, so you could say exactly that portion of millage is always going to go to the building so that we hold true to what the voters wanted. That's a policy choice you could make. You could put more in, you could put less in.
Thank you, very helpful.
I guess, one thing that I have here is, how would prospective development partners, employment partners, folks that we want to help us actualize our vision for these areas, how will they view this tool? How will that set us up for success to attract kind of in the economic development, competitive atmosphere? How does that help you kind of advance conversations that you're having with those folks?
Yes, I appreciate that question. It will help. There are some noted needs around the city right now, and up until now, there hasn't necessarily been a response to the issues that have been raised from some of the development community. I think one of the easiest examples to point to, frankly, is the lack of parking for all of our manufacturing district here. That in order for this area to densify, there's going to need to be some structured parking, and yet structured parking is 5 to 10 times as expensive as surface lot parking, so it's an investment, and as we've seen everywhere else, often there's a municipality helping with that because it tends to be, or the design would want it to be something that would help the district, not only a specific parcel. So that would be a really good example where, from a messaging perspective, we can now say we've got a tool, we may need, and I think that, after this, there's going to be a certain amount of time to analyze the power, the muscle that it has and what it can do. But certainly if a new development is brought forward, we could do those calculations based on something that's brought forward or a district that's brought forward for redevelopment, and be able to apply those dollars in a similar fashion as we've done for some of the other areas. But we don't need to be able to build also roads and entire, infrastructure systems, so we can focus the dollars that we have on the very specific need in these three zones.
Thank you for that. Any other discussion? This is the second reading. We can continue discussing in committee, or I'd entertain a motion.
I would move to recommend approval of all three ordinances, to council.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, well, that covers the agenda for tonight. Thank you, guys.
Is there any timing necessity on passage?
Next, it's already first meeting in December, yes, at the last meeting of the year, so that they can be applied to these three buildings that I mentioned.
Go ahead.
They do, you do need to substitute. So one of the Southern Gateway TIF, I missed a parcel.
Oh.
And our crack finance team also missed a parcel, and so we added that into a substitute version that was also provided in that packet.
Tonight's current packet.
Yes.
All right, so
Although
what we,
it's just
we can do
an
that.
exhibit.
and,
Yes,
okay.
yeah.
All right, well, thank you guys so much, and we will adjourn 6:52.
Kelly, will we have a recording obligation of the auditor?